This.
Teenagers sentenced to death, dying to live.
Do you ever think about what if?
Or living to die.
What's the last thing you'd want to tell your loved ones?
I don't know.
Lessons in life from death row. Next, Ricki.
Tonight at 5 on UPN 38.
Frazier's got a great...
About the way that he treated me.
Her mother was always involved in what was going on. That was a definite problem. Was never allowed to do anything, just the two of us, make decisions, come to agreements, come to realizations.
Mom was always involved?
Pretty much, for the most part. That doesn't set well with me.
Star Trek Voyager, Wednesdays at 9 on UPN 38.
A couple of months ago, I had a very emotional experience that I would like to share with you. I spent time with two young men who were on death row for murders they committed when they were just teenagers.
The charges: burglary, first-degree murder, kidnapping a woman and pushing her off a bridge.
Smoked some marijuana. We drunk, went to the China Rock Bridge. We ran across 3 people and raped a girl.
Those men are waiting to die in Potosi State Penitentiary in Missouri, and we are about to go inside to see how they live and to find out what they did and why, as teenage criminals, they were sentenced to death. The deadly shooting spree at Columbine High School showed us an unimaginable side of teenage violence, and statistics show that the number of children committing violent crimes has been on the rise since the mid-90s. The end result is that we are terrified of our own children, and we are desperate to know what could possibly turn a teenager into a murderer. And increasingly, when kids kill, we are trying them as adults. In fact, 24 states now permit the execution of juvenile offenders. There are 74 of them on death row currently awaiting their executions. Each one has his own tragic story. In a few moments, you will meet 2 of them and hear about their crimes, and you will get a glimpse of their lives on death row.
All you can do is hold on to what's good, and it seems like it's the only thing worth living for.
I'm just sitting here waiting on execution day. But I believe in my heart that's not going to happen. You know, I believe in my heart that they're not going to execute me.
But Antonio's attorney told us that he would not be surprised if Antonio had received his execution date by the time you see this show.
Would you believe Jennifer and Billy have bonded? Listen,
I've never felt a sensation so cool, so intense.
Sensational.
My mouth feels incredible.
Next.
Win one right now.
On the next Ricki.
You gotta stop.
Our family's at war.
It's disgusting to see my mom with a woman.
You need to keep your nose in your own business.
And I can't take anymore.
It's the worst thing I've ever seen. They go back and forth, back and forth.
Can the lie detector settle the score?
Have you been lying about this pregnancy?
Even though I lied most of my life to you, it's not a lie.
Find out.
And I do have lie detector results. Do we want them?
Next Ricki.
Hi, I'm standing in front of the Potosi Correctional Center just outside St. Louis, Missouri. We are about to go in and talk to convicted murderers who are waiting to die on death row. The men we are about to meet were convicted of crimes when they were just teenagers, and we're about to hear in graphic detail the circumstances that led them here. A teenage hangout on an abandoned bridge where 2 girls, 2 sisters, were violently raped and thrown into the river. Their deaths tore their community apart. In 1991, Antonio Richardson was sentenced to die for the rape and murder of 2 sisters, Robin and Julie Carey. Antonio was just 16 years old at the time of the crime. Now 26, Antonio sits on death row wondering if and when he will be executed. He has maintained his innocence for 8 years.
I'm not going to plead guilty to something I didn't do.
The way Antonio tells it, he had been partying, as he often did, with his 19-year-old cousin and 2 friends on April 4th, 1991.
I was with some people and, you know, we drank a little bit, smoked some marijuana, whatever.
High on a mix of pot and alcohol, the 4 teenage boys wound up at an abandoned bridge known as the Chain of Rocks that spans a treacherous part of the Mississippi River. 20-year-old Julie Carey and her 19-year-old sister Robin also were on that bridge that night, checking out a poem that they'd inscribed on the deserted overpass.
Here's 2 beautiful, young, talented girls that were showing a cousin from out of town the bridge that they were proud of because they did some graffiti on it.
Julie Robin and their cousin Thomas Cummins acknowledged Antonio and his friends, and then they parted ways. The girls might still be alive today if Antonio's older cousin hadn't suggested that they go back and rob them. Someone else said, "Yeah, I feel like hurting somebody," then handed out condoms. Possibly police speculate to avoid leaving any DNA evidence.
They raped the girls and told me and another co-defendant if we ever said anything about this issue to anybody, they would kill us or whatever. I was in a situation, I was 16, both of these guys was much older than me, much bigger than me or whatever, and I was scared.
After the rapes, the violence continued. The two girls were pushed off the bridge, plunging to their deaths in the river 90 feet below. The girl's cousin, Thomas Cummins, who was also pushed, survived. Julie's body was recovered 3 weeks later, but Robin's body has never been found.
For them to meet their death in this horrible fashion after being raped, I think that you can sense how frightening this must have been.
KTVI Fox News reporter John Auble covered the story.
Cummings says the men forced him and the girls down in through this manhole to a small ledge where he had them disrobe and then pushed them both into the river. Then he says he was forced to jump from this same platform.
This is where the case gets complicated. The four defendants and the girl's cousin, Thomas Cummins, all gave conflicting testimony about who pushed the sisters to their deaths. In his initial testimony, Cummins said that he could not identify the voice that told him to jump, but at Antonio's trial, he changed his mind.
The prosecutor specifically asked you, can you identify the person that pushed your cousin from the bridge and ordered you to jump? He stated no. They asked him again in another co-defendant's trial. The same question, he stated no. All of a sudden, he came to my trial. They asked him, can you identify the person that told you to jump? All of a sudden, he say me. What that tell you? The man committed perjury. He's lying.
Whether or not he was, the prosecution successfully pinned first-degree murder on Antonio because he took part in the attack and did nothing to stop it. I had a chance to ask Antonio about what really happened that night in April, but before we could begin, he had something to get off his chest.
Before I, do this interview with you, I'd like to, apologize to the Carey's family, the victim's family about this whole situation. I'd like to apologize to my family now for, the changes that they have been going through since I've been incarcerated.
When you came to prison, you were just a kid in an adult prison. What was that like for you, being so young?
When I first came through, I seen a lot of staff. I seen people get raped. I done seen a lot of different things go on in here. My thing is that I'm not trying to stay in nobody's prison. I'm trying to go home. So, I limit my associates to where I might socialize with this person, I might socialize with this person. If we're not on the same level, I don't deal with you. And a lot of guys, they don't understand that about prison.
If Antonio had pleaded guilty, he could have received life in prison instead of death. But that is not all that bothers Antonio's current attorney, Gino Baptisti. He says the judge would not take Antonio's low IQ into account.
In this case, we had documented borderline mental retardation that the judge did not and would not consider.
In Antonio's case, the IQ issue to me is completely irrelevant, as has been indicated in the report, because an IQ of 70 is borderline mentally retarded, and it's certainly not something that renders somebody incapable of functioning.
It hurt him because one of the most compelling mitigating things that you could ever put in front of the decision maker in a death penalty case is the IQ factor.
Baptisti also says that the court ignored Antonio's family history, which was filled with drug and alcohol abuse. When we come back, we will meet Antonio's family and talk more with Antonio about what it is like waiting to die.
My life right now is a living hell here.
Is one or both of your parents elderly, sick, or disabled? If you hate that you have to care for your parents but your brothers and sisters don't, you could be a guest. Call 1-800-GO-RICKY or log on to www.ricky.com.
"26-year-old Antonio Richardson is in a maximum security prison outside of St. Louis, awaiting execution for the rape and murder of two sisters, a crime committed 10 years ago when he was just 16 years old. The court document states, appellant, that's Antonio, held the sisters' shoulders down while Clemens, one of his co-defendants, ripped off her clothing and raped her. Appellant then raped the first sister. Antonio has denied pushing the girls off the bridge, but did he rape them? I asked him that question.
I didn't participate in any rape or any murder. I never played a part in none of that.
The prosecution disagreed. One of Antonio's accomplices agreed to testify against him and the others in return for a lesser sentence. The other two went to trial, and a jury gave them the death penalty.
I think by the time you had gone through all these trials, and by the time they got to Antonio, I think people had pretty well convinced themselves that the circuit attorney was on the right track.
After a quick 3-day trial, a jury found Antonio guilty but was deadlocked on what his punishment should be. It was the judge who handed down the final sentence, death.
At the trial, when they reached a verdict and made the announcement, what exactly went through your mind?
I was shocked, and I was depressed, and I was hurt because the only thing I can hear is, you know, is my family in the background, my mother, and my brothers and all of them crying and stuff, and you know, I know that I felt what they was feeling, but I was hurt more than anything because they took me away from my family.
Do you ever think about what if you weren't on that bridge that night?
I think about it all the time. It bothers me a lot because, you know, I ask myself, and you know, Tony, what could you have done to save them people's lives? And I was in a situation where, you know, my life was in danger just as well as theirs. So I had to think, you're going to save these people's lives or you're going to lose your life.
Do you blame anyone for your situation?
I don't have hatred for no one, and I don't blame no one for my situation or anything like that, because, you know, everyone have a choice in life. I did good and I did bad. That's part of life. Everyone make mistakes. It's up to you to correct the mistakes you made.
Antonio grew up in the working-class Pine Lawn section of St. Louis, and he has had a lot going against him from the start. Legal documents state, the atmosphere surrounding his youth was rife with drug and alcohol abuse. Richardson was raised without a father and periodically abandoned by his mother.
Basically, I don't, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that she was a bad mother, because she wasn't. You know, she was by herself raising 3 boys, and she did what she could, and I feel that she broke to where she couldn't take it no more.
I had started doing drugs off and on, you know, wasn't nothing heavy drinking. I might have smoked a little weed or something like that, but it wasn't where it was affecting them in any way. But in so many ways you do affect them, but I mean, but it wasn't where that was my part of my life, so.
My mother put, you know, her men friends in front of me and my brother, so, you know, I took it up on myself and take care of my little brother, make sure he went to school, make sure he completed school, and I basically raised him, and that's when I got involved in the drug game.
Antonio resorted to drug dealing and other crimes to make money.
The pressure that put on Tony, to me, was too much pressure, because, I mean, at that time, Tony was, what, 13, 14 years old, and with no real stability in life. It was too much.
I wasn't there. I was there, but then I wasn't there.
Antonio's case has already been appealed through the circuit, state, and federal courts.
I did a lot of things in my past, but I'm no murderer. I'm no rapist. You know, sometime in life, you know, it's time to let go. And I told Gino now, let me go to a better place. let's end this appeal process. He said, Tony, we're not doing that. You know, we're gonna fight this to the end.
His last chance to avoid execution now is to ask the governor to spare his life. According to his lawyer, in Missouri, that's a slim chance at best.
In the event that the clemency application is not accepted by the governor, it looks as if Antonio's scheduled execution will take place sometime in March or April of this year.
My life right now is a living hell in here, because I know that they could be waiting on me or be calling for me anytime, reading me an execution warrant.
He saw the one that comes down and bring the names when they're going to execute someone. He was so sure they were coming to tell him something. He said he took off running, and he ran until he could find something to go underneath. And he just went underneath there and stayed there until they left.
Tell us about the process of the execution. What are the last days or hours like?
Well, first of all, they would read your execution warning. The execution warning states you have 30 days to live, to fight for your life. After the 30 days, they would put you in a holding cell where you be held in a holding cell where you get no contact visits or anything like that anymore. They would bring you a piece of paper where they want you to make your own funeral arrangements, who's gonna, you know, claim your body or whatever. And they take you up to the room and strap you down and stick a gun in.
And I guess a lot of times when the phone rings, you never know what to expect, you know, what's going to be, if it's Tony, you know, okay, they going to say, okay, he got his date, you know, it's kind of hard it's hard. It's hard, there's really no sleeping. Yeah, I mean, you sleep, but you don't sleep.
I think about my mother and my grandmother, you know, how they going to deal with this, you know, because I know it's going to affect them a lot. And it's nothing that I can say or do to, you know, fix the pain they're going to have. But they know I love them, and they know my love would always be with them, regardless of what happened.
I love you. That's about all I can say to him. Really sorry for what you have to go through. And if it come to them executing him, I just have to say, God be with you. See you on the other side.
Coming up, you will meet a fellow inmate of Antonio's who also was sentenced to death for a murder he confessed to having committed when he was just 17 years old.
I'm gonna make you pregnant. Thursday on Ricki.
Do you know two people who went on a horrible date? If you want one of them to get a makeover so you can send them on a second chance date, you could be a guest. Call 1-800-GO-RICKI or log on to www.ricki.com.
Antonio Richardson has been sentenced to die for a murder he committed when he was a teen. But he is not the only occupant of Missouri's death row to have committed murder before he was old enough to vote. Remember this Benetton ad? It was not Chris Simmons' boyish good looks that landed him this ad. It was something much worse. Benetton featured Chris and other death row inmates in an ad campaign against the death penalty. Now only 24, Chris was the youngest included. At 17, Chris and a 14-year-old accomplice were charged with killing a 46-year-old woman in a botched home invasion robbery. Their take was only $6.
It involved me and him kidnapping a woman and from her home in the middle of the night and pushing her off a bridge, basically.
A jury took just 7 hours to sentence Chris to death by lethal injection. Just 3 months after this photo appeared in his high school yearbook, police showed up at Chris Simmons' high school to arrest him for the murder of his neighbor. Shirley Ann Crook.
The charges that they gave me were burglary, first-degree murder, and stealing over $150, and kidnapping.
At 2 a.m. on the day before, Chris and a friend had entered Shirley Crook's home through a back window.
They were there to commit a burglary, but at some point, Christopher turned on a hallway light. Mrs. Crook woke up. They saw each other, and they recognized each other, and that is what led to the subsequent events of Mrs. Crook's death.
Forcing Shirley out of her bed, the boys tied her hands and taped her eyes and mouth shut with duct tape.
They took her, put her in her own van, and they drove her from her house to a state park not terribly far away.
While Shirley Crook was conscious and still breathing, they threw her into the river.
I can recall wondering what a terrible death that must have been. I know she probably hit some rocks and laid there, maybe still alive before she passed away.
Do you ever think about the victim's family, how hard it is for them to deal with her death, the fact that she's not on this earth anymore?
And in all sincerity, I mean, I'm totally sorry for what I've done, and if I could, you know, give my life and it would give their healing, you know, and their lives back to them, I would. And you know, but that's not going to happen. And all I can do is pray that they can deal with what's going to happen now.
According to court documents submitted in his appeal, Chris displayed no such remorse at the trial.
During the trial, Christopher was told not to show emotion, not to have any outbursts. And he did as he was told by his lawyers at that time. He sat there as stone-faced and as unemotional as he could. And the prosecutor used that to his advantage. They took every opportunity to try to portray him as a person who wasn't remorseful.
Chris says that he was never given a fair shot at justice.
The average people aren't having the funds that, you know, the state would have to convict people, and they have, you know, they have prosecutors that they're definitely more prepared than any public defenders for our appeals or for the trial, you know, and average people don't have that kind of money.
Court appeals prepared by Chris's current attorneys state that jurors were never told about his troubled childhood.
I think that's definitely something, you know, that I wish could have been different, that things could have been talked about, but even that I even could have took a stand, and that my family would have had a chance to take a stand and talk about whatever was going on in the household and whatever problems we did have.
Had jurors known about the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, the drug and alcohol use, and the fact that Christopher ended up without really having a home as an adolescent, the outcome might well have been different in Christopher's case.
What could your parents have done, or what could anyone have done differently to have helped you get on the right path?
There's times when they look at me and they tell me, you know, we didn't know half what you were doing, and, you know, they wish they did.
When we come back, we will learn more about Chris's childhood. We will also meet his parents and find out how they are coping with the fact that their son is set to die.
That's the hardest part, because you don't know. You don't know when it's going to happen.
Imagine finding out that your son has been arrested for murder and then watching as he is found guilty and sentenced to death.
I know I was a good mother. And of anyone in our whole neighborhood that had discipline, it was our son.
If I had the chance and knew he was going to do this, you bet I'd be right there. I'd tie him up or hold him down or whatever to keep him in the house. You know, I'd keep an eye on him 24 hours. I'd have stayed up all night to make sure he wouldn't have, this would have happened.
The hardest thing is having people say bad things about me, because in my own heart, I was there for my child.
What kind of childhood did you have?
I think it was fairly normal, besides being, with two parents that were divorced and stuff, and being raised with my stepfather.
Chris won't say much, but legal papers filed for his appeal say that his childhood was anything but normal.
This isn't some boy that grew up in a wonderful household that had loving parents, that had every opportunity in life, and then rejected all that and went bad. This is a boy who grew up in a very troubled family life. He had a horrible history with his stepfather.
Court documents filed on appeal allege that from an early age, Chris became the target of physical and mental abuse at the hands of his stepfather, Bob.
Neighbors heard Bob scream at Christopher regularly. They would hear him say things like, "You're no good, you're worthless, you're a son of a bitch." In time, Christopher came to believe those things and considered himself worthless and no good.
His attorney reiterates what was alleged in court papers on appeal.
He was tied to trees, so his stepfather wouldn't have to watch him while they went fishing. He was given beer and got drunk by his stepfather as young as 4 years old. And just a myriad of physical and psychological abuse that took place.
If they want to say I did this kind of stuff and it helps you, then I did this kind of stuff. You know, I mean, I drank. I did stuff probably I shouldn't have done. I did stuff after I'd done it, I shouldn't have done it. But I tried bringing him up properly, where he was, I didn't beat him silly or, abuse him or anything like that. I just, kind of had to, you live by my rules or you don't live here at all.
But medical records offered in court show that Chris suffered serious injuries to his head and shoulders as a teenager.
There was an incident of physical abuse between Bob and Christopher when Christopher was an adolescent. I'm not sure what caused it, but Christopher often got into trouble for things like not doing his chores. This incident occurred outside the family's home. Bob grabbed Christopher by the ear and was dragging him back into the house, kicking him and knocking him down as they went. He ended up apparently rupturing Christopher's eardrum, and Christopher's ear bled, so there was blood running down the side of his neck.
And according to legal documents, when he started getting acne, his stepfather frequently would hold him down in the shower and squeeze his pimples until they bled. Eventually, Chris began to run away for days and weeks at a time.
We were too personalized. I think that, at a certain age, I couldn't be around him. And, I don't know what else was going through my mind other than just kind of getting away and trying to look for something to cover it up.
He turned away from sports and found refuge in drugs and alcohol, and at the home of a convicted felon known as Thunder Dad.
Basically, having a mindset to, be around people that was just a means to get drugs, and knowing that I definitely had an addiction for getting high on anything that I could get my hands on.
I believe that Christopher's use of substances was in an effort to blot out what was happening at home. If you smoke enough pot, if you drink enough alcohol, you don't feel the pain of being called worthless or a son of a bitch.
I think you lose yourself in your feelings and you grasp on reality.
Chris's spiral into drugs and alcohol would ultimately land him on death row.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Christopher Simmons, guilty of murder in the first degree.
It was shocking when he received a death penalty. It was in just disbelief. You couldn't believe that this had happened, And he just sat there.
The only thing I think going through your mind half the time is hearing your family cry. I don't think you have a grasp of what just happened, or you don't realize any kind of other thought that could have been there. I mean, that's all you're hearing of your family. I mean, one of their complaints is they didn't even have seats in the trial. And that's because the prosecutors, they want, they want everybody to be there for the conviction. You still hear them. And there's nothing else to think about.
Chris is now the youngest inmate on death row in the state of Missouri.
I understand your two brothers just recently went to the homecoming dance, and I know you never had the opportunity to go to yours. What's that like for you, dealing with your younger siblings, experiencing things that you never got to?
I think I sound like a parent to him sometimes, just, you know, trying to tell him to enjoy the moment. I know a lot of times when you get younger, you don't appreciate what you're going through at the time.
What do you dream about?
A lot of weird school ones, you know, I mean, that was the last environment I was in, I suppose, and things you're thinking about as far as friends at school. Sometimes with executions and everything like that, too, and thinking about seeing other faces and other people that are getting executed and stuff.
How do you see the world differently now? What do you value now that you didn't before?
The first year I was locked up on this, I mean, I think I went through depression and suicidal thoughts, and I think that's where it was like rock bottom. And there was even something hopeful in that, though, that I found a devotional guide. You know, it was a Christian devotional guide, and I read him to this day, and it's a daily devotional guide. You realize you have a lot of bad things in your life, but you know there's something good there too, and all you can do is hold on to what's good, and it seems like it's the only thing worth living for. I'm choking up, I'm sorry.
What's the last thing you'd want to tell your loved ones?
I know that I want to be able to not cause them any more disappointment or pain or anything, and I don't want them to, you know, think of this situation as something that's going to hurt them or cause them any more agony than what it has already, you know. And then there's ways that you can try to find good in everything.
Last thing I'd want to say to him in that time, and hope that he hears it, I would want to be with him. I just would want to hold him. And the last words I hope he hears is that I'm there, I love him.
As far as last words, I don't know. I might be singing that day.
Do you think that Chris deserves to die? Stay with us.
Our family's at war.
You gotta stop.
Can the lie detector settle the score? Next, Ricki. Take a look at ordinary bottles. You can see bubbles. Take a closer look and you could find germs. But look at the Playtex Nurser. Less bubbles, so there's less gas, less spitting up. And it's much more sanitary because a fresh, pre-sterilized liner goes in each time.
We've just heard from two young men who were sentenced to be executed for murders they committed when they were teenagers. Do you think that juvenile killers deserve to die for what they did? And should all juveniles who commit violent crimes be eligible for the death penalty? We posted those questions on our website, and in a few minutes we will share with you your surprising answers. But first, let's go back to death row.
How many people have been executed since you've been here?
I don't know the numbers. I mean, I'm definitely not counting them, you know. I'd be willing to say it could be around 25.
Missouri is number 3 in the nation in terms of the amount of executions. And when you compare that with the population, we're really, really off the scale.
Every time a man gets executed, you're thinking about, you know, it could be, and you know, you're praying for that man, and you know him, you know him personally in here.
Missouri isn't the only state coming down harder on kids who commit violent crimes.
Many states, you know, set the age at 16. And when a state has the opportunity to seek the death penalty, and the defendant happens to be 16 years old, that never, in my opinion, dissuades a state from going forward with seeking the death penalty and imposing the death penalty.
The state may say these juvenile offenders are adults, but others, especially their parents, refuse to see it that way.
At 17, you cannot vote. You are not an adult. You're not able to vote. You're not able to drink. You're not even able to fight for your country.
But some legal scholars and psychologists would argue that at 17, like Chris, you are old enough to know right from wrong.
He killed this woman because she saw him And he was aware of the fact that the outcome would be that she would incriminate him and that he would get in trouble and he would suffer incriminations from the law. So he was capable of anticipatory thought, knowing what the outcome would be, and he was capable of knowing right from wrong, at least in objective terms. He may not have embraced it, he may not have cared, but he knew in objective terms that something was legal or illegal, right or wrong. If he didn't have that awareness, he wouldn't have killed her because he wouldn't have been afraid of being incriminated by her.
Both Antonio and Chris came from broken homes filled with abuse, drugs, and alcohol. We asked if those facts should be taken into account.
In Christopher's case, the jury didn't know the kinds of things that Christopher had to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So they had no way to understand the kinds of decisions that he might have been making. They couldn't possibly begin to understand why Christopher was hanging out with the people he was hanging out with, why he was using drugs and alcohol.
It's known that children who are treated violently become violent. Just as in the Antonio case, they said that the boys just felt like hurting someone. Violence is a call for a community to reach to their highest self, to intervene and help these people, not to fall to that level and return violence with violence.
The defense attorney says, well, he's a product of his environment, and then the prosecution will typically say, well, he may be, but there were plenty of other children who grew up in the same environment who did not go out and commit those particular crimes.
But is it okay morally to sentence these juvenile offenders to death?
The U.S. does seek to be a leader in the human rights field, and yet we're one of only 2 countries in the world that hasn't ratified a treaty called the Convention on the Rights of the Child that forbids these kinds of executions. So that's where we stand on the world stage. And I think even apart from the international concern about this, we should be concerned ourselves. I mean, do we want to eliminate young people from the human community for things they did when they were 16 or 17, when there are alternative punishments available?
A 16-year-old who commits a crime with intervention of therapy, with validation of his good aspects and validation of what's been done wrong to him, can become a very different person at 26.
This is a man who now understands the significance of what he did. Executing Christopher now for something that he did when he was 17, 7 years ago, won't change what Christopher did. It won't bring the victim back. And I don't think that executing Christopher today is punishing the Christopher who did this crime.
I think he shows remorse now, and that he's sorry for what has happened. He's grown up a lot. When at the age of 17 he hadn't even started life.
I can honestly say that I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. I don't think the same way I thought back then.
When all is said and done, drugs may be the single greatest influence in cases of violent crime. Chris agreed.
Especially with the younger people, it seems like they're falling off into drugs a lot more, you know. I can look at 75% of people in here, and I know that their lives were affected, you know, pretty strongly by drugs, and that had something to do with why they're here. So I understand the influence of it. I've thought about the influence in my life, and I know that there's a cumulative effect, you know, that you desensitize and detach away from reality, I think.
We had a case where one of the teens had the front yard of a home to sell drugs, and the other one had the backyard of the same home to sell drugs. And when the one in the backyard tried to sell drugs in the front yard, the one in the front yard shot and killed him.
People are scared, and communities like those in Missouri are demanding tougher sentences for juveniles.
Some kinds of crimes of passion that people may understand. You know, a husband kills a wife, or a wife kills a husband, even sometimes when there are children killed. But, you know, you take somebody out, you shoot him, why don't you just take their money? Why do you have to kill them too? You know, that sort of thing, I think, creates tremendous fear in people, and that's where we get this mentality that you've got to get rid of these people, eliminate them from the human community. We don't understand it, and therefore we want to eliminate the problem by killing the people.
You think that you commit a crime and that you won't pay because of your age, you're wrong. You know, you're wrong. And if you're doing things in life that you shouldn't be doing, they'll find a way to get you when they want you. You know, I'm living a life right now that, you know, I was 16 when I came to here, and this place ain't for me. It ain't for nobody. But if you out there killing, robbing, murder, you will pay.
Stay tuned to find out how you voted on the death penalty for teens.
If it wasn't for the hopes, like I said, and the good things, there's not a reason to stay around.
I can honestly say that I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. I don't think the same way I thought back then.
It is chilling to think that these young men could be put to death any day. What you're about to hear could very well be their last public statements.
I still have my ups and downs, you know, about this situation. I'm still fighting for my life. I'm working on my clemency right now and about to the governor, asking him for a stay of execution. Tell the Carey family that I'm truly sorry for what happened to their daughter. I hope in their heart they forgive me for the pain that they have been through.
How this all changed me? When I was first arrested, I definitely hit rock bottom. I felt worthless, and through treatment I realized there was a lot better things in life, and there was a lot more things that I should have been looking at. You can't help but think about how many more months you're going to have. You know, I wanted to try to do something better with what little time I may have left, I guess.
But the question remains, do they deserve to die for their crimes, or would life imprisonment suffice? Here's how you voted on our Ricki.com poll. After looking into the eyes of convicted murderers, Antonio and Chris, I walked away from this teens on death row experience with more questions than answers. Are teenagers truly capable of understanding the enormity and impact of their acts? And if the answer is no, should they have to pay for their crimes with their lives? If criminal psychologists believe that young offenders are the most capable of being rehabilitated, should we throw away their young lives? If, because of the cost of appeals, it is more expensive to carry out the death penalty than it is to carry out a life sentence, does it make sense to execute criminals at all? If Shirley Crook or the Carey sisters were our loved ones, would any of these questions matter? Or would the execution of Antonio or Chris bring any of these victims?